it's wonderful to, we should all be focused on engineering education, and what I'm coming to tell you today is why we should start really early, and why we should start when kids are as young as 4-year-olds. So let's start with a question for you. So which one of these do you think doesn't fit? Which one doesn't belong to this group? Take a second. Which one do you think is an object that doesn't quite work? Any thoughts? Take 1 second and discuss with the person next to you. Which one do you think doesn't work? Any theories? Well, we don't have mics right now here, but let me tell you what people say. Sometimes people say the one that doesn't work is the faucet, and they say because it always has water. Someone is agreeing. Well, I would say that's not true, because there is a sensor there, right? The one that doesn't fit is a little puppet here, which is a robot made out of soft. There's no electronics inside. There's no sensors. There's no way to communicate. It's just a puppet robot. Right? All the rest are objects that have a component of hardware and software that interact. And so we use this example. You're only working in engineering education, and it still took you some time to think about which one doesn't fit. So imagine for little kids. It takes even a lot longer to understand. So our goal in the research that we do is that when we show a picture like this, immediately everyone will come to the thought, well, that one, right? That's a puppet. That's not alive. That doesn't respond. So the idea of smart objects is not new, right? Back in the late 60s, my advisor at MIT, Seymour Papert, was already thinking about the first engineering device, a big logo turtle that kids could program. And that logo wasn't only on a screen. The first logo was actually on a floor turtle, on a device, on an engineering device. Then, of course, Logo became popular like this, right? And how many of you have played or seen Logo? Can I get it? Lend your hands. So, quite a bit of you have played with Logo. And that's how I started when I was a student, when I was little in Argentina, when IBM brought Logo to Argentina in the early 80s. And I was, as a kid, had the chance to play, and later, I grew into actually working. But Seymour wasn't actually so proud of Logo. What he was the most proud of was his first book. It was Mindstorms. It's really about children, computers, and powerful ideas. And what the movement at the time was, well, children and computers are great, but what we want is children to have powerful ideas, to think big, to do aha. And that is really the goal of what we're calling right now engineering education, or what we call computer science education, or computational thinking, you name it, the different movements. But it's really the thinking that goes behind. It's not only the skills to be able to solve problems. So later, all of these ideas went back to the turtle and became the Lego Mindstorms, which was the first robotic kit. I was lucky enough to be a grad student at the Media Lab. At the time, we were developing Mindstorms, so I saw it from the beginning when it was a red brick and not a yellow brick, and it was big. But it all comes back to objects and having smart objects, where people can learn about building, where people can build circuits, and people can design programs that behave in the world. So we're talking about late 60s, early 70s, 80s. Then there was silence for a long time. And when I teach my students now, who are around 20, none of them had played with Logo. But a lot of you have played with Logo. So there was a silence. However, I would say in the last 5 years, there's a huge comeback. And this is a nationwide, all over the world experience. So now we see initiatives such as Code.org and countries that are really bringing computer science and computational thinking back into the educational system, starting in kindergarten, some of them. So why do you think this is happening? This is not new. Back in '67, Seymour already had the big turtle. What is driving this? Do we know more now about the cognitive or educational benefits of programming? What are your thoughts on this? Well, actually, no. This is what's driving. What's driving is the workforce, as usual, right? We know that there is a huge increase on need of computer sciences and engineers. And therefore, we know that if we want to have that workforce, we need to start to educate them. So this is really what's driving. That's what's driving the industry. That's what's driving policies in ministers of education. That's not what's driving my own work. What's driving my own work in the need of starting early is that we know that young kids, and when I mean early, I mean this age, 4 and 5 kids. This is the age when we start, in Spanish we say escolarización. In English we say this is the time when we become learning about literacy, right? We learn how to read, we learn how to write, we learn about math. So if we believe that computer science and engineering are important literacy skills, the literacy of the 21st century, this is the time to start. There are many, many reasons. From a developmental perspective, this is the time when children are more open to learn new ideas. This is the time where we avoid future stereotypes, because we know from research that then it's the females and the minorities, at least the minorities in the US, the ones that do not make it into engineering later on. However, we know from research that if we start early, we're opening the door to everyone. By 4th grade, 9 and 10-year-olds, stereotypes are already settled. So unfortunately, a lot of engineering and computer science programs that start afterwards, in middle school and high school, is already late. We really need to start young. This is the time to start. And then I wanted to share with you, this is an interesting study done by Jim Heckman. He's a Nobel laureate in economy. And he showed from an economic perspective that those countries and interventions that start in early years have more return of the investment than those that. So even, we have an educational, we have a cognitive, we have a societal need to start early, but we also have an economic need of why we need to start early. However, the question so far has been, well, if we want to start early, we cannot just copy models of engineering education and computer science education that have worked for older kids. It just doesn't work. So how do we do it? So that's exactly the question that my research group at Tufts University called DevTech has been struggling for the last 20 years. This is what our focus is. How do we design systems, interventions, curriculum, assessments, new robotic systems as well, new computer science curriculum that will engage very young kids, 4 and up, to learn some of these concepts. So we have 2 big principles. And what I'm going to share with you is these 2 big principles and then give you examples for the rest of the talk. The first one is when we can talk about coding, we talk about coding as a literacy. We don't talk about coding as problem solving. And for those of you who are very familiar with engineering education, problem solving is the holy grail. So we stay away from problem solving. Problem solving is something that happens on the way, but it's not the goal. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that. So keep in mind this coding as literacy as first principle. And the second one is coding as a playground. And you're all familiar with a playground is? And we mean, playing. Really playing with and about the technology. And so those are the 2 frames, big theoretical frameworks that we use for all the work we did. And building on these principles, in my group, together with Mitresnik at the Media Lab, we developed ScratchJr, which is the younger sibling of the programming language Scratch. And this was designed for 4 to 7-year-olds. And we also developed the KIBO robot, which you can program with tangible wooden blocks without needs of a screen or keyboard. So I'll be talking about these 2 environments that we develop, and they're out on the world. And in the way to that, I'll be showing how these 2 principles, coding as literacy and coding as playground, get played out. So coding as literacy. So when we mean literacy, what do we really mean? And if we mean a literacy of the 21st century, is any literacy, like textual literacy, is the ability to use a symbol system. It could be English, it could be Spanish, it could be C, Java, Scratch, you name it, and a technological tool to comprehend and express and generate ideas. So that is really a literacy, where you're able to do that. But literacy has other functions. So literacy changes our thinking, because we'll be looking a little bit about a history of literacy, in the world. When we learn how to read and write, our thinking changes, and also ensures civic participation. I would say that the big splash that literacy did over history is really allow people to have a voice or as we say in Spanish, voz. And those who cannot read and could not write do not really participate in these democratic systems. So if we look a little bit of how historically literacy has changed our thinking, think of the oral periods, where we had a big storyteller that would come to the plaza, to the center, and would tell their stories. So those stories tended to be very cyclical, repetitive. They had big heroes and big epics so people could remember, right? And those who were there could listen to the story at the time. The minute they were gone, the story would change and become a rumor, and it would change from generation to generation. As time went by, we had the first scribes. Those people had a lot of power because suddenly they were able to put in paper and make the data, right? It remained, right? So it wasn't anymore about the story that the big hero did, but it was about, in general, it started by making lists and for accountability. So the sovereign and the kings would know how much land they had and they owned, right? And so those people really had a lot of power. They were the only ones that could keep track of things. So printing press really democratized the process. So now everyone could express their thoughts, everyone could share their ideas. And then the question is, what's happened with coding? Is this a continuum on that? We have only to open the newspaper today, and I don't want to get, what has been Mark Zuckerberg doing a few weeks ago testifying in Congress, right? So are those who understand algorithms, are those the ones that are going to have the future of our democracies at hand? Do we all need to understand what an algorithm is? Does it change our way? So when we think about literacy, this is what we mean. It's not just learning how to code and learning how to solve the problem of the syntactics of particular programming language, but it's really big picture about that. So in general, we all know that coding promotes abstract, logical thinking and engages in problem solving. You're all at this conference. I don't need to convince you of that. And we all know that right now there's a movement that's talking about computational thinking, right? At least in the US. I don't want to put the name. It's very debatable what is computational thinking and what is not computational thinking. So for now, we can all agree that if I'm programming, I'm thinking logically, I'm thinking abstractly, and I'm solving problems. So is that a skill for everyone? Yes, of course it's a skill for everyone. It's not just for a select group, right? The same way that learning how to read and write is not just for the professional writers or for the professional journalists, right? Learning how to code is not for the nerds. Learning how to code is for everyone, and if we want it really to be for everyone, if we really truly believe it's a literacy, it's our responsibility to start when kids are learning how to read and write, which is around 4 or 5, depends on the country. But we need to do it in a developmentally appropriate, age-appropriate way. So for that, we need tools, right? The same way that we have pens and pencils and laptops and typewriters, we also have programming languages. Well, none of those are tools for young kids. I don't know how many of you remember a 4-year-old or have a 4-year-old around, but none of these will work with them. So what we've been doing in my research group is really trying to develop and explore what does it really mean to have a developmentally appropriate programming language that would engage 4- and 5-year-olds in learning programming in a playful and literacy way. So I'll be sharing with you 2 examples. One is ScratchJr and the other one is KIBO. And as I mentioned before, ScratchJr is a collaboration with Mitch Resnick at the MIT Media Lab. Let me ask a show of hands. How many of you are familiar with Scratch? So a lot of you. That's wonderful. So Scratch was designed for children 8 and up. And a little bit of a story. So when I had my own little kids, I went, let's play with Scratch. Well, they cannot. When you're 4 and 5, you don't know how to read. There's no way you can learn Scratch unless you have an adult sitting next to you constantly. Sure, that will work. But a classroom, 25 children, 1 teacher, it's just not going to work. So that's how the idea of ScratchJr came about. And we started through a grant of National Science Foundation in 2014. And right now we have 9.5 million downloads all over the world. And it's free, and it will always continue to be free. It's part of where we stand up here. So now, bear with me because I cannot see the mouse in my computer. For those of you who do not know ScratchJr, this is how it is. So you can create a project. You can choose from an already existing background or create your own by drawing or make a picture. So I'm going to take a picture of a plant. Kindergarten, everyone studies plants and ecosystem. So here I have my plant, and then I'm going to choose a character, again from my library, or draw my own. I'm going to choose a frog, and I'm going to program my frog to do something. My frog, when I press the green flag, is going to jump twice, it's going to grow twice, it's going to shrink twice. I'm going to record the sound.
Ribbit.
Action repeated 4 times. And now I'm going to end my program, and then I press the green flag. There's my frog following my algorithm.
Ribbit.
And my sequence of commands.
Ribbit.
I can go ahead and create new pages, so I can make stories. I can use a grid for X and Y, and I can use typing. So this is the basic of ScratchJr. Remember, these are children who do not know how to read and write. Right? And the concept of literacy. At the end, they created a product that's shareable. They created a project. They didn't just solve a problem and move to the next. The same thing that we do with literacy, right? We don't solve a puzzle, a crossword. It's a crossword, crucigrama, right? You don't solve that. That doesn't mean you're literate. You're literate when you're able to read a story and tell a story, right? So this is the equivalent here of reading and telling a story. So for those of you who know Scratch, if I wanted to make my frog jump in Scratch, this is what I will do. And we spent 4 years and over $1.5 million going to that, right? So the idea of simplification. When we're working with young kids, what we really want to do is simplify, 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 but give flexibility enough so children can still express themselves and create any projects they want. So let me show you a little bit of examples of what kids do. So these little 5-year-olds create a race.
I'm gonna do a race with 4 tailors. Ready?
Slow orange blocks. They go very slow.
Turtles are in go.
Wow.
So very simple.
Look at my movie. Who wants to see my movie? Hey, this camera is more cool. My movie started now. One movie. Invisible? Invisible.
So this actually movie goes on forever. And what she did is created a cat that's visible and visible. At some point, she ran out of the screen. So then we introduced the concept of repeat. And they introduced the concept of how many times you have to repeat. So it came as a natural need from the idea that she wanted to create a movie, that a cat that appears and disappears. So we didn't start by teaching them the commands and then trying to find a use for that. The other way around. She had a use, and then we start teaching the commands. So just to give you a sense, for the last we launched in 2014, but for the last 2 years, we've been collecting analytics, and we're trying to see what we can do with that data. Google Analytics is not the best tool to learn about, to think about learning trajectories. So we are right now in the middle of exploring possibilities. So if you are working with learning analytics, please send me an email, talk to me afterwards, because we're really trying to do something. But in terms of Google Analytics, right now we have 9.5 million downloads since we launched, over 22 million projects created. PBS, which is the educational TV company in the US, we made a partnership with them. So now you can download also ScratchJr, where your favorite characters and cartoons, and kids have created those stories as well. And it's been used in every country in the world except 2, North Korea and Western Sahara, translated into over 2,000 languages and dialects that I didn't even know they existed. And these are the top countries. It's very interesting. Spain is number 7 in the world, so go Spain. And what you could see here is that the countries that have policies in place that are bringing computer science into schools are the ones that are using it the most. Just to give you a sense per continent, this is a sense of what's going on. Australia is big, a lot of big use because they have very strong policies in place as well. So since we started, we've done a lot of work. We started with iOS, but now it works on Androids and Chromebooks, and we are translating curriculum and materials and assessments. So right now we have 12 languages. We have a huge group of volunteering translators, or over 1,000 people that are, volunteering and translating to their own language, and that's how the community is growing. It's really a community effort where people come together and translate. There's an attempt right now to try to bring more of the, we are pretty comfortable with the literacy aspects of this. However, the playground aspects are a little bit missing, because what we do in the playground is a lot of physical work, right? And here it's nice, but you still have a screen, right? And do we still want kids in front of a screen? So what I'm gonna show you right now is one of our curriculum offers that we have for how teachers could use multiple tablets in a classroom and really enforce movement and screen. So this is one of the projects. We have a project that's called Lights Around the World, which is we look at festivities all over the world, and teachers create projects with their children to celebrate those. And I chose this one because I really like this one. Okay, so this is multiple tablets, and it requires a lot of coordination between kids and playing around. We've also done games where kids have to run and touch one tablet and touch the other, and it's about collaboration. So when you started the conference, here they were talking about collaboration and non-competition, and this is just one way to try to use a technology that wasn't really designed to collaborate, such as ScratchJr, or that wasn't really designed to have physical movement for this. So if you're interested in looking at ScratchJr, here's the website. I invite you to download, play with it, lots of information. So let's talk a little bit about this coding as a playground. That's a little bit, we're trying with ScratchJr, but there is so much you can do when you're in front of a screen. So let's think about what happens in the playground. Take a second, think about it. In the playground, children are running around, they're collaborating with others, they're making sandcastles, they're going down the slide, they're choosing what they want to do, and they're switching all the time. They're getting into conflict. The two kids want the red track at the sand play, right? They want the same thing, and they will fight for it. They are creating, they are inventing, they have fantasy, they are talking. So I joke with my students in child development that all dimensions of human development, the moral dimension, the social dimension, the personal dimension, the cognitive dimension, the language dimension, they all get played at the playground. And the adults are usually on the side, right? They let children experiment, play, and they intervene. There is a big conflict. Otherwise, they will just let children play. So let's contrast that playground with this, the playpen. The playpen, in comparison, is very, very limited, right? It's a confined space where there are very few options, and the options are by the adult. I choose the toys I give to the child. And sure, I can have social interaction, but I will choose 2 kids to put inside. And the physical interaction is really if you're trying to get out of it. Otherwise, it's very, very limited. So we use this as 2 metaphors of when we think about technologies for young children. We want playgrounds, we don't want playpens. So playpens, unfortunately, is what we see the most in every early childhood setting where you go and visit. You see a lot of games to teach letters. You see a lot of games to teach words. You see a lot of things. And those are great. Just like a playpen is great if I need to go cook and I need to leave my child safe, in a safe space. I go cook, I come back, 10 minutes later, still there. But I'm not fooling myself. This child didn't have a wonderful thought experience. It was just there safe. So that's very important not to confuse playpens and playgrounds as the metaphors. And this is particularly important because technologies are going to be changing. And today I'm talking to you about ScratchJr and KIBO. But in 10 years, it will be different technologies. However, the metaphor of the playpen and the metaphor of the playground remains. So when we work with teachers, we always ask them, is this technology that you're looking at reminds you of the experience of a playground or reminds you of the experience of a playpen? And that's a very, very important question. So what we try to do to get a little bit closer to the playground experience, building on ScratchJr, is we created this KIBO robot. And we got the grant the same year that we did ScratchJr. So for me, it was a fascinating experience because I was able to work with both of them at the same time, but it's a different model. So the way you program KIBO is like this, with these wooden blocks. That's your programming language. Again, 4 to 7-year-olds. The blocks are color-coded. So blue is motion, orange is sound. You can record your own sounds. You can play or read existing sounds. Yellows are lights. And the robot has a bunch of art platforms that you can attach and decorate, and it has different sensors. It has a light sensor, so you can detect if there is light or not and move in a certain way. It has a sound sensor to respond to sound. It has a distance sensor. And then it has outputs, like a light and a microphone. So the robot is never finished without the children's imagination. We don't want a plastic cute robot that doesn't require anything, because when we're talking about early childhood, we're talking about integrating multimodalities. And multimodalities is not necessarily things that happen on the screen. It's really different textures, different materials, different recyclables. And it's not just for the child's education, but if we're going to integrate this into the kindergarten classroom, we need to provide a tool that kindergarten teachers feel comfortable with. And as much as I love Legos, and I work with Lego, and I get a lot of funding from Lego, they're very, very hard, the small Lego pieces, to create engineering projects. It's a lot easier to work with arts and recyclables materials. So I'm going to have the expert, because you might be wondering, how do you program, right? I show you the blocks, and I show you the sensors, but I didn't say what's the mechanism to get the program from these blocks to the robot. So I'm going to have the 5-year-old, who's the expert here, to explain to you, and you will guess.
I'm going to say begin, beep, go forward, then we're going to be like to the right, no, to the left, to the right, left, right, left, right, left. No, but do it.
The direction of the arrow should stay on. So these blocks will tell our things that we understand. How are you? How are you doing? Is your curriculum nice? Oh yeah, yeah. It was one or the other. Oh yeah. We didn't realize it was not for a while.
So very much like in ScratchJr, where you create a sequence of commands. This is how we're starting teaching programming, right? There's a sequence of commands, and with your scanner, you go one by one. It has the concept of literacy and representation. So what we talk with the kids is that the robot doesn't understand the icons in the blocks. It doesn't understand the words either. The children don't understand the words either, right? But it understands the barcodes. And barcodes is something that children are very familiar because they find them in the supermarket, right? Every time they go to a supermarket. So the whole idea of early childhood is try to use technologies that are around. We call that emergent curriculum. And so this is a technology they will encounter. And next time they go to the supermarket, they could relate to that. So the story of KIBO, it's a story of a lot of work. We started in 2012 with a wood-based prototype. For me, it was very important not to have plastic. If you know kindergarten classrooms, you'll see a lot of Montessori materials. You'll see a lot of, we like wood, right? It's a very nice texture. And so we created a wood-only prototype that turned out to be extremely expensive. And then we went to 3D printing things. And then we created the whole instructions for kindergarten teachers to 3D print their own KIBOs. And then I was at the conference showing all of this, and a teacher asked me, well, how can I get that? And I said, well, here's our instructions. Go find your 3D printer and make it. And they're like, what? My what? My 3D what? I'm a kindergarten teacher. I cannot do. I want to buy that. And so what we, just give me one. And so I went to university and I said, can we, the ones that we 3D print here, can we give them out? Because we had 3D printed 60. Can we sell them? They say, no, we're a university. We lose our nonprofit status. So I went to the program officer that gave me the grant from National Science Foundation. And I said, I have this problem. My research has been successful, but now it cannot really be successful if we don't scale up, right? These kindergarten teachers are not going to be able to 3D print or create their own circuits. So in the US, there's a mechanism that's called SBIR, that it's a mechanism from the government that gives money to researchers that want to create companies out of the research. And so they gave us that grant, and we were able to create a company and license the technology, and all with government funding. And so in 2015, KIBO has been widely available, and I'll tell you a little bit of that story later. But when we work with, when we work with kids, with KIBO, we work the same way that we work with teachers in our professional development. And that's why I brought this picture. So this is our coding class. There's no computers, there's no rows, there's no sitting. Everyone is sitting on the floor. Everyone has all kinds of materials, both kids and teachers. This is the same. And the kinds of things we do is we don't have a separate coding or engineering class. We integrate it into different disciplines. So this is a very well-known book, where is a very, very hungry caterpillar and has to go around eating different food. So traditionally in kindergarten, they read this book, and then they ask kids to make a drawing. And this drawing of the book tends to be a squirrel, right? And if you know the book, you know what the drawing is. If you've never seen the book, just beautiful colors. So what we do here is we ask kids to use keyboard robots to recreate the story of the book. And here you have the caterpillar eating the different food. So in order to do this, there was a lot of math. They needed to count the steps. There was a lot of estimation, prediction. There's a possibility of using sensors. So when you detect different color light, you stop. So what we're doing is we're integrating the reading and writing, the literacy piece. We're also integrating with math, and we're integrating with computer science. And also you had to build a sturdy caterpillar that won't fall apart. We also, going back and a little bit of a tribute to Seymour Papert, to the original turtle that could draw on the floor. So here's, we attach markers to the KIBOs, and we look at geometry and KIBO art. And this is very interesting because suddenly you can start introducing complex concepts such as angles at a very young age. And then one of my favorites is dancing around the world. So this is a curriculum that we have implemented all over the world. And we ask children to learn about a particular culture, and learn about the dances, learn about the costumes, interview people from the country, learn about geography, learn about history of that particular place, and then come and create a KIBO dancer or a KIBO dance that would represent. And at the end of the day, we don't have a competition, like most engineering activities are an engineering competition. What we have is a performance. And so all the teams come and show their dances. And so I have a bit of, this is hard to get. Salsa. We have some group dances. So what you saw there, that's take number 10. Where really, if you were educators, I will show you take number 1. Because take number 1, all the robots with their little skirts, which are coffee filters, are crashing with each other. And really, the learning happened between take number 1 and take number 10, which is the one that we saw, where they really needed to coordinate, work in teams, set up a lot of things. And then Karina mentioned, do you remember where I was from? From Argentina, so I had to show you this. So right now we have KIBO in 52 countries, and it's actually very exciting to see how this idea of coding and engineering in a very basic way is starting to happen in a lot of kindergartens all over the world. But there was one country that did things a little bit different, and that's Singapore. Who you see there is the Minister of Education in Singapore on the floor. So in 2015, I got a call from the government. They were working on a project called Smart Nation, which is in the 20-year project to really change the infrastructure of the country to become a smart nation. And they realized that if they wanted to have a smart nation with smart tunnels and smart sensors and smart data and smart everything, they need to have smart kids. And they look around the research and they say, well, if we start in middle school or high school, it's too late. Our Smart Kids initiative needs to start when the kids are 4. So they called me and we started a very thorough project with the whole country. We train, just to give you a sense, I did the first cohort of training the trainers, and I arrived to Singapore and I had 700 kindergarten teachers there for the first training, and they were supposed to train. And they really, because they're Singapore, we did a lot of research also and seen the project. They just won an award at the country level of being the first country to really take it seriously, how to bring engineering, education, and computer science through the playful approach. So if you want to search it out, it's Playmaker program, how they created. And what I want to show you is a little bit of an example, a video that I was sent of these same dances around the world as recreated by 4-year-olds in Singapore.
Our KIBO will do the ribbon dance. Our KIBO comes from China. This is our program for our KIBO. Begin, repeat 4 times, forward, spin, turn right, backwards, and repeat. We scan this 3 times, then 10.
An example, what you saw the kid doing is documenting the same way that we document as grown-ups our program. We teach kids the idea of documenting their programs from very young age, so they cannot read or write. What they have is the little papers of their code, and they keep an engineering design journal. And this is just to start teaching them the practices of good engineering from the beginning. And that's what he was reading from his little paper. So we've done, I decided I'll show you. I know this is an international conference, so I thought I'll pick a couple of countries to show you interesting stuff. Denmark, the Lego group has a very innovative school there, and so they've been doing a lot of work with KIBO there. And when I say they've been doing, and we've been doing the research with it to look at how you could really integrate into the use of a makerspace. So what happens in a makerspace when you bring KIBO in a non-traditional way, where you could add new sensors and add new things. So that's the work in Denmark. Panama, we've done very, very interesting work there. There's a school for kids with autism spectrum that was started by the First Lady. And they were trying to explore what they could do with robots, but they were mostly thinking about social and robots that will engage children in social interactions. And what they found with KIBO was very interesting, and we just published a paper there, is that not only they could engage with the socials, but they could actually have cognitive improvements, and they could really understand the programming. And so that work is fascinating. We need to really learn a lot more, because we realize that these kids learn programming in a very different way that neurotypical kids learn programming. So that's interesting. And then Argentina, my home country, is just launching KIBOs in every single kindergarten classroom in the city of Buenos Aires. And so we did training for all teachers there, and they translated all of the materials. This is about to start right now, the project. And then with my colleague here, Karina, and her colleagues, we did a pilot project here in Tenerife. We have a paper that is about to come. And again, if you want to learn more about that project, please talk with Karina afterwards. Very interesting of how we introduce it in different settings and different schools. So what we're doing in my research group is really designing the technologies, but also making sure that the technologies go out to the world with the right approach. Because it's not about the technology only. You know, I fall in love with ScratchJr, I fall in love with KIBO. They're my technological kids, but the pedagogy doesn't come in the box. It's very important that if we're going to introduce these technologies into the early childhood setting, they are introduced with a set of frameworks, pedagogical frameworks, that are really respectful of this concept of coding as literacy and coding as playground. And that's really important. So what I want to do is share a little bit about the similarities between the two of these technologies, and hopefully this can serve as examples if any of you is designing or thinking about designing technologies to be used in early childhood. Hopefully you could learn from these principles and adapt them. So first, let me tell you about the design process. So design process, like any design process, is time consuming, right? But here, your co-designers are teachers and young children and at the same time. So from day one, we did not create a prototype and show it to the teachers and children. We created a paper drawing, or even with Scratch, we use Scratch and we say what doesn't work, right? So we really get their voices from the very, very, very early on and in naturalistic settings. So we did not bring people to our lab. In our lab, everything works. We went to their classrooms. For example, with KIBO, our sound sensor was working great in our lab. The minute we took it to the kindergarten classroom that was noisy, it stopped working. And so it's very, very important to really test. And the methodology we have is the first designs are in our lab, then we have a lab school in my department. So that's why we might wonder in computer science and child development. Yes, I have joint appointment into child development computer science, and my lab involves humans, right? I have children who are part of my lab as well as my students. And so we first test things there, and then we go into a huge, big public school. And then we move, iterative completely. We iterate over 5 years. We go for every one of the technologies that I show you. We have 4 different prototypes, thoroughly tested with over 200 children and teachers, each one of these iterations. So we are a lab, right? We're a research lab. We're not a company, right? So, we do have an interdisciplinary research team. So in my lab, we have people from computer science, from engineering, from education, from psychology, from cognitive science. So it's very, very interdisciplinary. And of course, it's hard to work with people from other teams, but we take the time to learn about each other. And then we're very interested in contributing to the theory and also to design principles. So we document, and then we develop all along the way curriculum and assessment. And curriculum and assessment are 2 sides of the same coin. So it's not just about the technology, it's how this technology could be used, how does it align to national and state frameworks, computer science and engineering frameworks, as well as literacy, and how do we assess? Right now, we don't have national assessments to know if things are working. We know it's fun. Kids are always having fun, but are they learning? And how are they learning? And how could we create assessments that are also in line with our pedagogy, which is literacy and playfulness? So that's part of our job here. And then we think very hard about this launch to market strategy. And I'm an academic, but I do need to think about that. How do I make my prototypes to be sustainable and scalable from day one? Because there's no point of me creating in my lab a beautiful technology that I can show at a computer-human interaction conference or at an engineering conference, but then no teacher could use, right? In the US, the money that makes my research work is taxpayers' money. So I want to get back to society, whatever the society invested, and they're not going to benefit from a paper. that a teacher can read. The teacher needs the technology. So we use two different strategies. For ScratchJr, because it's software, we are able to have it free and available. And we started with funding from the government, but then we have the Scratch Foundation that's actively supporting, and that's our intention. With KIBO, which is hardware, we could not put it out there free. So again, we started with this money also from the government, and right now we got an investor, and slowly we're going to try to get investors, and the more investors, the more lower we can get the cost. But it's very important to think about that. Otherwise, when we're presenting to teachers, we're not giving them a service. This is an amazing thing. Oh, sorry, you cannot have it. It's just a prototype. And that's very important. So in terms of coding as literacy, you will notice that both KIBO and ScratchJr, you program from left to right, which is not your traditional way of programming works. But this is the way kids are learning, at least in the major languages, right, in English or Spanish, how to write from left to right. And so we want to reinforce that concept. There's also the concept of correspondence, which is one-to-one. There is an icon, like the letter A, there's a letter, so it's one-to-one correspondence. The same is true for math, number one to quantity one. So here's the same action to a command. There is a promotion of personal expression. Just like in the goal of literacy is to be able to create something that you can share with others, same here. We don't give out exercises or problems to solve and challenges, as we love to call them in engineering. That's not what we do. If we think of literacy, we don't give them challenges to solve if you have been in a kindergarten classroom, you know that very early on they're already reading their stories, right? And we have storytelling skills. So it's the same here. We focus on shareable projects, not on solvable problems. There are many different ways to solve the problem of how to make a KIBO dance, where we focus on them being able to go from an idea to a final project that they can share, manage their time, manage their resources, do the research, solve conflicts, teamwork, so all the aspects of what it means to work on an engineering project. And then we're integrating with different disciplines. You saw it there, literacy, art, math. If we do not integrate, we're doomed, because there's no room in the curriculum for computer science or for engineering in kindergarten. It's all about learning how to read and write and learning how to do math. So we do need to integrate this into those disciplines. And then development of fluency happens over time. We all know that. When we learn how to read and write, that takes time. So the same thing is with coding. And in order for things to be fluent over time, we need a true programming language. So if I want to do something complicated with KIBO and use ifs and nested loops, I can do it. But that's not going to be my first program. My first program is going to be a sequence, very direct. But I can grow with the program and use the program in a lot more complicated ways. And that is why we do need, programming languages. And not just games that kids can solve and puzzle type things, because they have a low ceiling. And finally, we know from simple building blocks that can be combined, we can create complex stories and complex things. Again, the basic of what a programming language is. And it's a tool for communication. At the end of the day, we want children to understand that programming and engineering here is a way to say something. It's a way to share with the world what's important to me. And some of the curriculum we've done is how to create a bot that can clean my room, how to create a bot that will help children who have a learning disability. So all kinds of things and into the real world. So that's as literacy. Now as playground. Important things is we want a playful and fun environment. If kids don't have fun and they cannot play with the technology, we're closing the door. And remember, the idea here was to open the door. So when they're older, they would choose engineering, they would choose computer science, and they would have some of the building blocks there already in place, right? So it needs to be fun, it needs to be playful. There needs to be opportunities for multiple paths of entry. So for example, in KIBO, sometimes there's someone that is not interested in programming, but is really interested in decorating, and will spend a lot of time decorating, and that's fine. Because at some point, that decoration will need to come on top of the KIBO, and the decoration will need to stay on. And when the KIBO shakes, it will fall. So it right? And when you work overtime, we have a method for helping children who start from different places really move through different roles. And that's part of the pedagogy that we focus on. So it's really, really important. The same way that in the playground, not everyone has to go to the swing. Not everyone goes to the sandbox. They can go and choose what they want, and at some point they will move around. So it's the same thing here for programming languages. Not just the block languages, it's different things. I can paint. I can use the camera. Diverse forms of engagement with the technology. Again, ScratchJr is an example. We didn't limit it to just be a block programming language. You could go into the paint editor and spend a lot of time creating your background. And that's fine. At some point, we're going to animate your background. It's fine to interact in different ways. It has to be developmentally appropriate. So for example, you saw in ScratchJr, you have a grid, for X and Y coordinates. Well, it turns out that children do not understand what X and Y is, right? So we created this grid, and we discussed very thoroughly. We should be, under one, but we do want to help them think about X and Y's, although we're not introducing that terminology. The same way that you see very few use of words. However, in ScratchJr, if you put the mouse over, the word will appear. Just like in the kindergarten classroom, you walk in and you'll see objects that are labeled. Kids might not understand the labels, but labels need to be there because you want to expose them to words. All dimensions of child development, social, emotional, cognitive development, of course, even the moral dimension. And let me give you an example. This is how we distribute the materials. Traditionally, when you work in engineering, you give kids a kit that has 2 wheels, 2 motors, 2 sensors, and go play with your engineering kit. We don't do that. What we do is distribute the materials in the room, and we ask kids to go and take what they need. So what happens, because you're 5-year-olds, everyone goes and takes all the motors they can find. Everyone goes and takes all the light bulbs they can take, and that's fine. Because what we do later is we have what we call technology circles, and we talk. Does your project really need, 60 motors? No. How many slots for motors do you have? 2. So why do you have 60? And in Arab pedagogy, this is right. This is what we want, because we want conversations about making choices as well. If our goal was just to improve engineering education as fast as we can, this would be a waste of time. We'll try to avoid, and we'll give them already sorted kids. We don't do that, and it's by design. So we are designing the learning environment, and we're designing how the materials are accessed. Again, when you are when I'm teaching in college, sometimes I cannot afford that because I have certain content that I need to cover in a certain amount of weeks. But in early childhood, I can do that. And that's one of the advantages. So let's take advantage of that. Open-ended creative experience. All the resulting projects are very different, and that's very important. There's no one solution that fits all. We want children's creativity to be displayed here. The same way that when they write a story, all their stories are different. And if all the stories look the same, we would call that plagiarism, right? Plagio. So why would all the solutions in engineering that look the same, is that okay, right? We want to start creating different things. And then we talk, and I won't talk a lot about this, but I want to mention this as my last slide. So we have a theoretical framework that's called positive technological development. And Karina, when she introduced me, she talked about how my research is about introducing technologies to promote positive development. And this is very important because, so for us, learning is more than education. Learning is about learning to be an individual that can work with others and be an active participant of civic society. And that's the goal of learning, and that's the goal of education. So when we look at the goal of our coding or our engineering curriculum, it needs to satisfy not just the cognitive domain, but all of this. And so this is very quickly what we call the 6 C's. So you can find these 6 C's in a playground, but you can find these 6 C's also through the use of technologies. We want children to create content, to make choices of conduct, to build community. That's why we always have a final project that parents are invited to. You saw that in Singapore. And we have communication, collaboration, and creativity. Those are the 6 C's. So when we design curriculum, when we design technologies, when we design assessment, we all align to these 6 C's. And if you want to learn more about this is my book that talks a lot more, my recent book that talks a lot about that. So thank you. We can find lots of papers and things here on the website.